Connecticut, that also influenced obedience behavior a lot. Notice what Milgram is doing here. He's looking at the features of the external environment as causing obedience on the part of the individual without any reference, not one word in this article, without any reference to what the person is thinking or feeling or anything at all like that. Now, this is a controversial experiment for a large number of reasons, mostly the wrong reasons. The reason it should have been more controversial than it was precisely because Milgram treated his subjects as passive in the situation. He never once inquired into what they were thinking or feeling or wanting, never once inquired into how they perceived the situation. It fell to Martin Orne, who, full disclosure, was my advisor in graduate school, to argue that Milgram had really gotten off to the wrong start by ignoring what the subject is doing in the situation and how the subject perceives the situation. Here's a quote from Orne. In any psychological experiment, the subject's knowledge and beliefs about the study may have significant effects upon his behavior. How the subject perceives the experiment in general, and how plausible the deception, being randomly assigned to the teacher role and things like that, how plausible the deception manipulation is for him in particular, must be evaluated before you can understand the experiment at all. Orne pointed out just a couple of really simple features about the Milgram experiment that must have led subjects to think that something else was going on. In the first place, think about the situation from the subject's point of view. You walk into a laboratory, there's this guy in a white coat and a clipboard. He says, okay, you're going to be the teacher, we're studying the effect of punishment on learning, you're going to be the teacher, this guy's going to be the learner, and he's going to go in this other room, and whenever he makes a mistake, you're going to shock him, and all of that. So then they go into their rooms, and the teacher sits down with a little list of paired associates and a shock machine and all this kind of stuff, and starts doing this experiment. What's the first thing you think of when you put in a situation like that, yeah? What am I doing here? That's exactly right. What in God's name am I doing here, right? Why don't you do this, right? You're the experimenter. That cue alone would tell a subject that all is not what it appears to be. That cue alone would tell the subject that there's something else going on, okay? And once we begin to think about the experiment from the subject's point of view, okay, we begin to analyze an experiment like the Milgram experiment in a completely different way, okay? Now, that's the point here. There's a whole tradition of early experimental social psychology that, influenced by this idea that behavior is a function of the environment, and influenced by Skinnerian behaviorism, didn't think the subject's point of view mattered. All you had to do was to manipulate the environment, and behavior and behavior would come out. So Orne, for example, argued that subjects will be actively trying to figure out what's going on in the experiment, what the purpose of the experiment is, okay? So what am I doing here, as you said? And also the behavior of the experimenter. When the so-called learner starts faking a heart attack and says, oh, I've got a history of heart trouble and all this kind of stuff, this guy in the white coat and the clipboard just kind of stands by and says, the experiment requires that you continue, you must go on. He doesn't seem to be bothered by this at all. The passivity of the experiment is completely inappropriate to the situation if you look at it from the subject's point of view. Now, I don't want to get caught up in the Milgram experiment. This is the only time I lecture on it. I actually despise this experiment. But the point that Orne was trying to make is that what applies in the laboratory applies in social behavior in general. In order to understand what the person is doing, you have to understand the situation from his point of view. That is the essence of the cognitive mediation of social behavior. Okay, so here we go. An analysis of the subject in a psychological experiment that is, in fact, an analysis of the person engaging in social interaction in general. The first, Orne argued that there's an implicit contract between the subject and the experimenter. We don't have to talk about that. But the most important thing is that subjects, like all individuals, are sentient, active beings who are trying to understand the environment that they're in. Engaged in what F.C. Bartlett, British psychologist, called effort after meaning. And in order to understand the situation that they're in, they make use of what Orne called the demand characteristics of the situation, by which he meant the totality of cues available in a situation that tell the person what's going on and what's expected of him and all of that. Now, this was Orne's analysis of the psychological experiment, but it was also Orne's analysis of social behavior in general. Whenever we're in a social situation, we are trying to make sense of that situation. And how we make sense of that situation is going to determine what we do in it. That is the essence of the cognitive point of view. To see how this works for a second, let's look at another famous social psychology experiment, the famous helping experiments of John Darley and Bibb Latané. You all know this one from your introductory psychology course as well. Subjects are brought into the laboratory to ask to complete a bunch of questionnaires, and as they're sitting there completing the questionnaires, some smoke starts filtering into the room from the outside through the ventilation ducts, and all Darley and Latané are interested in is, will anybody get up and do anything about it? And the salient finding of the original Darley and Latané experiment is whether there's smoke coming through the ventilation ducts or there's somebody in the next room saying, help, I've broken my foot. When people are alone in the room, they're much more likely to help than when they're in a group. Counterintuitive finding that you would think, but that's long been replicated. Now, at this point in the experimental analysis, that's just another piece of situationism. If people are alone, they tend to help. If people are with others, they tend not to. It's a feature of the situation that is controlling people's behavior. But Darley and Latané didn't stop there. They tried to understand the situation from the subject's point of view. In the first place, even when there's smoke coming through a ventilation duct, or there's somebody, you hear a crash and somebody says, I've fallen, I think I've broken my foot, the first thing you want to do is say, what is really going on here? Okay? Is my help really needed? Maybe this will clear for a second. In a second, maybe she doesn't really need my help after all. I'm supposed to be sitting here doing these questionnaires for my experimental credit or whatever. So one of the features of being in such a situation with other people is that there's diffusion of responsibility. I don't have to do anything, maybe because somebody else is going to do something. But then, what are they thinking? They're thinking, I don't have to do anything because somebody else will do something. What they're thinking about. And then finally, there's this pluralistic ignorance that Darley and Latané talked about. Even a situation like that is still ambiguous. Okay? And when situations are ambiguous, we look to other people for cues as to how to behave. What are they doing? they're looking at us to figure out how we're behaving. So we're all looking at each other, right? And we're not doing anything, right? That's pluralistic ignorance. But what Darley and Latney did, and the real advance in this kind of research over what Milgram did, was that they actually tried to figure out how the situation looked to the subjects in the situation, tried to analyze the situation from the subject's point of view. And that, again, is the essence of the cognitive point of view in social psychology, that it's the subject's perception of the situation that matters, not the situation as objectively defined. Quick question. Well, one thing they did was to talk to their subjects. Right? The other thing they did was they actually put themselves in the subject's shoes, okay, to try to analyze this. And then there's a whole series of experiments later on to kind of pick apart these things and try to manipulate pluralistic ignorance and diffusion of responsibility and stuff like that. This is just the first experiment. But between 1963 and 1968, over a 5-year period, you can see the emergence of a full-fledged cognitive social psychology, and you see it really here, clearly here in Darley and Latney, in terms of how they explain the subject's behavior. They explain the subject's behavior in terms of what the subjects are thinking. When Milgram explained his subject's behavior, he explained the subject's behavior in terms of what was going on outside. That is the difference between behavioristic social psychology and cognitive social psychology. One more question, then I gotta go on. Yeah, well, there's more about this in the lecture supplements, okay? But the general idea is that when you do experiments, especially experiments involving deception, which Orrin did very rarely and I don't do at all, there is a kind of pact of ignorance that goes on between the subject and the experimenter. Because the experimenter doesn't really want to find out that the subject is seen through the deception, okay? Because that wrecks your doctoral dissertation, right? And the subject doesn't really want to tell the experimenter that he's seen through the deception because, well, it'll hurt his feelings. And if you saw through the deception, you just wasted everybody's time, right? So there's this pact of ignorance where the experimenter agrees not to inquire too hard into what the subject thinks, and the subject basically agrees not to tell the experimenter too much, and everybody goes on their merry way. If you think about that for a second, there's a lot of pact of ignorance in ordinary social behavior as well. What do you do when you run into somebody in the street? Hi, how are you? You don't want to know, right? And what do they say? Fine. They could be dying, and they'll still say, fine. That's a pact of ignorance as well. And what you have to do is you have to really, well, how are you feeling really, right? You have to try to read between the lines and do all this kind of stuff to figure out what's really going on in that interaction, a point that I'll come back to in the third of these lectures. Okay, so where are we going here? Okay, so the general idea here is that cognition mediates between the person and the environment, okay? The individual is not just reacting to the situation. The individual is trying to give meaning to the situation, to try to figure out what the stimulus events actually means. And that means that his or her behavior is going to be a response not to the objective situation that interested Watson, for that matter Milgram, but rather to the subjective situation, the situation as it is mentally constructed in the mind of the individual. So the individual's behavior in that situation, his response, if you will, is going to be determined by the meaning of the situation, and the meaning of the situation itself is going to be determined by the individual's knowledge and beliefs about the world, by his perception of the situation in general, by his expectations, but also by his beliefs about himself, by his fund of the skills. You know, so if I see somebody with a broken down car on the side of the road, I don't know anything about internal combustion engines. I'm not going to stop and help. If I see somebody with a flat tire, I might actually help because that's something I know how to do. Right? So again, it's what you believe, not just about the situation, but about yourself. And this is knowledge that is acquired through learning, through direct experience, but also through social learning of people trying to teach other people. So now let's go back to Lewin's grand truism for a second. Okay, behavior is a function of the person and the environment. There's a little comma there, and the comma is there because Lewin understood that the person and the environment were somehow related to each other, and he puts it here. Okay, in principle, it is everywhere accepted, everywhere in his world. In principle, it's everywhere accepted that behavior is a function of the person and the environment, and that the person and the environment in this formula are interdependent variables. Interdependent, not independent. They are connected up somehow. They influence each other somehow. And it's trying to figure out how this interdependence between the person and the environment occurs. That takes us to our next advance on Lewin's grand truism, which comes from Kenneth Bowers, an American who was a faculty member in Canada for his entire career, who took this Lewinian perspective seriously and said, look, you can't think about the person and the environment as independent of each other. Okay, they're not just main effects because they interact with each other. Okay, a person's behavior is determined by the situation in which it occurs, but the situation itself is largely determined by the person. That is the essential statement of the doctrine of interactionism, which basically says just that situations are as much a function of the person in them as the person's behavior is a function of the situation. Situations are a function of the person, all right? So we get a new set of causal linkages. You got the person affecting behavior, you got the environment affecting behavior, but now you've got the person affecting the environment. Well, how do we do that? Well, it turns out that there are at least 4 different mechanisms by which people affect the environments to which they respond, or people affect the environments in which their behavior occurs. 3 of these have to do with behavior as we ordinarily think of it. First, evocation. In evocation, the mere physical presence of the person or the physical appearance of the person changes the situation in which he or she is in. Just being there, okay? Not doing anything at all. Second, selection. The person affects the environment by choosing to be in one environment as opposed to another, okay? So in evocation, imagine for a second that a man walks into a room full of women, all right? He hasn't done anything, except he's just appeared there. Imagine it's like a Star Trek transporter. He's just kind of dumped down into this whole room full of women. That is going to change the situation, okay? He hasn't done anything. He's just there. That's what evocation is all about. Selection, you choose to put yourself in one environment as opposed to another. All of you chose to come here instead of going to Stanford, okay? You chose to put yourself in this environment, and it was a good thing you did. Third, through behavioral manipulation. We engage in overt actions that will change the character of the environment that we're in. You go to a party, it's kind of dull. You put a lampshade on your head, you start dancing on the coffee table to kind of liven it up. You do something through your overt behavior that's intended to change the situation that you're in. And finally, if you can't do anything else, but even if you do something else, you change the environment through your covert behavior, through acts of thought or acts of meaning, by performing a cognitive transformation of the mental representation of the situation. You go to some horrible social event that you really don't want to be there because your friends invited you, and instead of thinking about it as a horrible social event and you'd rather be dead, what you think about it is, I'm doing this for my friend. You haven't changed the objective situation. It's still a horrible event, right? Still a horrible party, but you've changed the meaning of the event for yourself. We're going to focus in this course on the last one of these modes of the person-situation interaction, where people affect the environment by changing their mental representation of the environment. People affect the environment by changing how they perceive the environment, how they remember the environment, how they think about the environment, okay? In addition to all the other ways that they have of doing this. And then finally, going to finish up in 1 second here, Al Bandura down at Stanford points out that if you look at a figure like this, the causality is always unidirectional, from P to B, from P to E, from E to B. Bandura points out in what's known as the doctrine of reciprocal determinism that, in fact, when it comes to real social interaction, real social behavior, everything is both cause and effect. Personal factors are affecting behavior. Behavior is feeding back to change the person who emitted that behavior. The environment may elicit behavior. Behavior is changing the environment in which it occurs. The person is changing the environment through evocation, selection, manipulation, and transformation, but the environment is also affecting the person. What Bandura calls triadic reciprocality, or feedback relations, that give us a very complex causal picture, which we'll also see working out over the next 2 lectures. Thanks very much. We'll see you on Wednesday. Remember, go to your discussion section this week. Discussion sections start this week.